The Aegean sun did not beat down, it illuminated. It caressed the curves of the Parthenon, glinted off the bronze spear of a perfect statue, and danced on the wine-dark sea. This was a world obsessed with light, with form, with harmony. The Greeks had a word for this supreme value: charis, grace. It was beauty, favor, kindness, and poise, all woven into one. It was the smile on a core statue, the divine ratio in a temple's column, the effortless excellence of a hero. But beneath this radiant surface, in the shaded porticos and quiet gardens, where philosophers pondered, a more troubling obsession was taking root. These thinkers became intoxicated with grace, not as a mere aesthetic pleasure, but as a fundamental, terrifying force of the cosmos. Their pursuit of it would lead them to deconstruct the human soul, advocate for the destruction of the imperfect, and wage a silent war on the messy reality of life itself. This is the story of how the love of beauty curdled into a doctrine of chilling purity. It began with Pythagoras, not just a mathematician, but a mystic cult leader. He and his followers discovered a shocking truth: the universe was not chaos. It was music. They found grace in the perfect mathematical ratios of a vibrating string, the whole number relationships that created harmonious tones. For them, this was a religious revelation. The planets themselves hummed as they moved through the heavens, a music of the spheres inaudible to most, but whose mathematical grace governed all of existence. The human soul, a fragment of this cosmic order, was itself a dissonant harmony. To be virtuous was to be in tune. To sin was to create ugliness, a clashing note in the divine symphony. This was a beautiful idea, but its implications were severe. It made morality a matter of aesthetic calibration. There was no room for the messy, the irregular, the emotionally complex. The goal was to become a perfect, clean mathematical equation. The obsession with this divine grace demanded the suppression of any human impulse that couldn't be expressed as a ratio. This philosophical pursuit of perfect form reached its zenith and its most disturbing conclusion with Plato. He took the Pythagorean mystery and built a fortress of logic around it. Plato's theory of forms proposed that our world of trees, tables, and human bodies was a world of flickering, imperfect shadows. The true reality existed in a transcendent realm of perfect, eternal ideas or forms. The highest of these forms was the form of the good, but inseparable from it was the form of beauty, the ultimate abstract source of all grace. In his seminal work, The Symposium, Plato describes the path of the true lover. He does not begin by loving a single beautiful body, but by learning to see the beauty common to all bodies. Then he ascends to love the beauty in souls, in laws, in knowledge, until he finally beholds beauty itself, not infected by the flesh of man or any other pollution. This sounds like a sublime spiritual journey, but read closely, it is a recipe for profound alienation. The philosopher is taught to see the physical beauty of a lover not as an end, but as a mere stepping stone, a flawed copy to be used and discarded on the path to a higher truth. The real breathing, imperfect person becomes an instrument for intellectual transcendence. The obsession with divine grace required the devaluation of earthly grace. This abstract idealism had a terrifying political counterpart, a blueprint for a utopia that would become a ghost, haunting the corridors of power for millennia. In his Republic, Plato designed the perfect state, a living organism of pure reason ruled by philosopher kings. These were not merely wise men, they were ascetics who had torn their souls from the cave of illusion and glimpsed the blinding sun of the form of the good. Their rule was not based on messy human empathy, fluctuating passions, or the grubby compromises of politics. It was to be governance by pure, dispassionate, geometric certainty. Their model was not the flawed citizen, but the perfect, unchanging, and eternal forms. And what becomes of the citizens who do not fit this perfect model? What is the fate of the irregular, the defective, the non-conforming in a society built on the pristine geometry of ideal forms? They are removed. They are smoothed away like a rough spot on a perfect statue. Plato advocated with chilling calm for a rigid eugenics program, a state-controlled breeding system he called a royal lie, where the best would be paired with the best to produce golden children, while the inferior would be secretly paired to produce bronze. The entire social structure was founded on a noble lie, a myth of metallic souls, gold, silver, bronze, to justify a rigid, hereditary caste system from which no one could escape. And in perhaps the most revealing purge, he expelled the poets. Homer, Hesiod, the tragedians, all were to be banished from the city. Their crime, their art was a copy of a copy, a mere imitation of the flawed physical world, which was itself a pale imitation of the perfect form. Worse, poetry appealed to the irrational, the emotional, the chaotic part of the soul, the very aspects of humanity that the philosopher king sought to extinguish. The state itself was to be a supreme work of art, a sculpture of perfect grace, and human beings were the living marble to be chiseled, broken and discarded if they flawed the divine design. The love of harmony became a rationale for totalitarian control. The pursuit of perfect societal grace demanded the surgical elimination of the awkward, the weak, the emotionally complex, and the artistically expressive. It was a vision of peace achieved through philosophical genocide, a silent, orderly hell masked as heaven. Even Aristotle, the more empirical, earthbound thinker, who famously declared that Plato is dear to me, but truth is dearer, could not escape the tyrannical lure of ideal form. His entire philosophy was built on the concept of the telos, the way, final purpose, the end goal, the perfect state towards which all things strive. This was grace in motion, a dynamic journey towards perfection. An acorn's grace was its silent, determined push to become a perfect, fully realized oak tree. A knife's grace was its perfect sharpness, the unimpeded fulfillment of its cutting purpose. And a human's grace, their eudaimonia or flourishing, was to live a life of perfect activity in accordance with reason. It was a powerful, compelling idea that gave meaning and direction to existence. But this philosophy of potentiality contained a dark, inherent judgment. Anything that failed to achieve its telos, that fell short of its perfect form, was, in a profound sense, a failure. A stunted tree was a tragedy of unfulfilled nature. A blunt knife was a useless perversion of its essence. And a flawed human? By this cold logical extension, those born with severe physical or mental limitations, those who through injury or circumstance could not achieve the rational ideal, were natural subjects of pity at best. At worst, they were considered natural slaves, andropoda, man-footed creatures, living tools for the use of those who could achieve grace. In Aristotle's Politics, he argues that some people are slaves by nature, and that for them this condition is both just and beneficial. The obsession with functional grace created a brutal hierarchy of human worth, measured against an impossible, inflexible standard of perfection. It was a worldview that could look upon a human being and see not a person, but a broken tool, an aborted potential, a flawed execution of a philosophical blueprint. Where Plato sought to eliminate the imperfect, Aristotle provided a rationale for their perpetual servitude, framing it not as cruelty, but as the natural order of a universe striving for its own perfect expression. This philosophical undercurrent, that the imperfect must be scrubbed away to reveal a perfect form, did not die with the Athenian Academy. It flowed like a hidden aquifer through Western thought, surfacing in moments of ideological fervor. We see its stark face in the geometric purity of fascist architecture, which erased organic history for sterile state power. We hear it in the cold surgical language of the eugenics movement, which used terms like racial hygiene to justify forced sterilizations and the Holocaust, its perpetrators seeing themselves not as monsters, but as gardeners pruning humanity for a more graceful future. And we see this ancient obsession metastasizing in our own digital age, in algorithmically curated feeds that show only airbrushed lives, and in the relentless pressure to optimize our bodies, minds, and careers, systematically airbrushing away the vulnerability, failure, and humanizing flaws that constitute a real life. The philosophers of ancient Greece promised a world of perfect beauty and reason, but in their logical, inhuman flight from messiness, they bequeathed us a durable tool for intolerance. They taught us to love the cold, perfect statue, and in doing so risked teaching us to despise the living, breathing, imperfect marble from which it is carved, and from which we are all made. Which of these philosophical obsessions haunts you the most? The mathematical purity of Pythagoras that reduced the soul to a number? The transcendent forms of Plato that justified the erasure of the individual? Or the functional hierarchy of Aristotle that rationalized slavery as a natural state? Tell us below. And if you seek to uncover more of the dark truths history tried to hide, subscribe now, because the shadows of the past are never really gone. They're only waiting for us to look.